So good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. King, distinguished guests, and our beloved parents, principals, and friends. My name is Tracy Higgins, and I'm the Kindred Board Chair. And I'd like to welcome you to Kindred's evaluation release and our parent principal panel that will be moderated by John King, who's the former education secretary and the current president and CEO of the Education Trust. Suffice it to say, today is a very big deal for us, and we're thrilled that you're here. Thank you for joining us. So back in November of 2016, like many of you, I suspect, I was profoundly disappointed with the election results. Actually, that's a little bit of an understatement. I was angry. I was very angry. But I knew that I couldn't just stew in that. I had to take those feelings and turn it into some sort of positive change, but I didn't know what that was going to look like. So I sat with it. I donated some money, I ranted, but mostly I sat with it. But I knew that I had to be part of working to counter the ugly that had been unleashed on this country. Enter Laura Wilson Phelan, who I had met at a fundraiser for her first Board of Education campaign, and I was really moved by her energy, her passion, and her commitment, so much so that I came out of canvassing retirement and actually knocked on doors for her. Victor Reynoso was the first person I knocked on doors for, so Laura's in good company there. But in October of 2017, almost a year after the election, Laura invited me for coffee. So we met, and I knew she was doing this Kindred thing, but I hadn't looked too closely. Long story short, I signed up on the spot. Why? Simply put, the race and equity work that was needed in this country before the election took on even more urgency for me after the election. And the type of change that we need, that will result in equity in our classrooms and good results for all children, that requires honest dialogue, openness, and a willingness to reach across differences to find common ground and understanding for the good of us all. That's hard work. It's often messy work, sometimes painful work, but it's part of what we need to realize the change that we want to see. So at the close of the last school year, a group of Kindred parents got together to talk about their experiences. And I watched a video of the session. And listening to the parents, you hear how they changed the way they walk in the world. That they changed how they see themselves, how they see others, and what they now see as possible. And I was especially moved by the reflections of one parent who said that she was more hopeful with everyone's willingness to join in to find solutions. This woman described herself as a, I quote, black woman, a dark black woman, a big black woman, who sometimes would shrink herself in white spaces. And she goes on to say that working with the group really helped her to see how others advocate for their children, how they figured out ways to move forward, and how she could do the same thing. And she summed it up this way: it gave me permission to speak up, to be myself in this space. So she found her voice, and she uses it, and she takes up her full space. No more shrinking. That's just a snapshot of the power of Kindred, of the power of building strong, diverse networks of parents who are committed to fairness, to equity, and to achieving good outcomes for all children. It's big work, it's important work, and unfortunately there aren't enough of us doing it. But Laura had a vision, a hope for a better way forward. Like me, she comes from humble beginnings and has made it her life's work to make a difference. She's an alum of TFA, a former Peace Corps volunteer, something else we have in common, and she speaks Spanish, a bit better than I do, but okay. With that rich background, Laura is able to connect with our parents in myriad ways. She works tirelessly and smartly to breathe life into Kindred. It's a new idea, a new approach that is time and energy intensive. And you'll hear today how all that hard work and effort is paying off for our parents and our children. So many of you in the room have helped make Kindred's success possible through your time, your grants, your donations. Thank you. The work takes lots of time and lots of resources, and we appreciate your support and hope we can continue to rely on you. And of course, we invite and gladly would welcome new funders, new donors, new volunteers. Because really, when you think about it, this is shared work. We're all in this together. We all have to work to bring about this type of change. So we have to invest today in the tomorrows that we want to see. And the tomorrows that Kindred is helping to build are bright and full of promise for our children. It's my honor to introduce the brainchild, the mastermind behind Kindred, Laura Wilson-Taylor.
Do more forgiving. Yeah, our souls were brought together so that we could love each other. We are here for all of us. We're here for all of us. That's why we are here. It's been about 30 years since I started a speech singing. You can probably see why. It was 8th grade, and I decided that I wanted to run for secretary of our student council. But believe it or not, I was just a little bit of a geek in middle school. And if your school was like mine, only the popular kids could win such an election. And as part of this election, I had to give a speech in front of the whole school, all of those peers, and their eyes on me. My opponent was a very popular girl named Rose, and I knew if I wanted to win, I had to do something that would really grab the attention of my classmates. So in a moment of creative inspiration, I decided to rap to the Beastie Boys' Wipeout.
Oh my God.
So yes, you heard that correctly. And those of you who are laughing, I know you're from the 80s too. When the morning of the big speech came, I sat on stage, clenching my mini boombox, my dubbed version of Wipeout, and listened to Rose's rather ordinary speech, and began to have serious doubts. But like today, I had given myself no escape valve, and so I had no backup speech. I approached the microphone, pressed play, and began my secretary's rap. When I finished, I looked out at the audience, and it was dead silent. And then my peers erupted in applause. I won that election, and the rest is history. My 12-year-old brain didn't realize it then, but displaying that naked vulnerability to my peers triggered a shift in their brains that enabled them to connect with my humanity. And that connection led them to change their behavior, to not vote with their friends, but to vote for the person who showed bravery that day, because I was the person that would make them feel the best about their vote. In Kindred, our dialogue groups, we do very much the same thing. Albeit we do it without rap music. We help our parents connect with their internal drive to value others, which triggers in them a natural drive to do more, to be their best selves. And this is how we do it. First, Kindred builds relationships. We start in a school with 2 small dialogue groups of 8 to 10 parents who represent the demographics of the student body. They meet 10 times over the course of the school year. They build trust and love. They naturally begin to share real-time relationships, resources with one another. And as they talk about their experiences in education, Kindred helps them see how they represent a trend in our country where children of color, especially children from lower income households, have access to less opportunity. And when parents see these trend lines, they get angry and upset. It's often the first time they've seen them. Because these people are no longer just a faceless statistic. They're the person sitting next to them whose children are in their classroom together. And so we harness that energy to help parents do something about the inequity in their school. Parents decide on an action to take, and then they implement that action. Now, Kindred will never be large enough to manage all of these interactions in every school in perpetuity, nor should we be. And even if we were, we shouldn't be the ones that are carrying on that vision for their school. It's their school, not ours. They should shape it. So in year 2, we train a set of families to run their own dialogue to action groups. And at the same time that these groups are going on, Kindred works with their PTA and the school administration to create a receptive, structured place for parent actions to be supported ongoing and carried out so that they can lead to increased opportunity for students. You'll hear examples of that today from the parents. Over time, across our city, Kindred will organize these diverse parent coalitions to influence our policies and practices to promote equal opportunity for all of our children. And we believe that when we organize parents across lines of difference towards better outcomes for all students, we change the game. It takes all of us. It is why we are here. Kindred is where it is today because of the generous investments of funders and partners who have provided critical support to help us grow. And I want to draw special attention to JBG Smith, who sponsored us today. Thank you. You'll hear from them later in the program. And thank you to you all. Finally, I want to acknowledge a few officials who are with us today. My friend and partner in Ward 1, Councilwoman Brianne Nadeau, is on her way if she's not here yet. Hansel Kang, State Superintendent of Education. Paul Keim, Acting Deputy Mayor for Education. Scott Pearson, Executive Director of the Public Charter School Board. And Anna Smith, who until last week was the Interim Deputy Mayor for Education. Thank you all for prioritizing this work. As you'll hear from our speakers today, Kindred's work has just begun, and the potential for transformative impact is promising and exciting. To help us understand these promising results is Michelle Rebels, Senior Associate from Community Science. For those of you unfamiliar with Community Science, it's a research and evaluation firm that specializes in solutions to social problems through the community and other systems change. Perfect, right, for Kindred? Michelle herself is an experienced evaluator. Over the past 2 decades, she's developed acumen in a variety of research approaches, including large and small group surveys, qualitative research, interviews, and focus groups. She manages Community Science's evaluation technical assistance for reputable organizations like the Kellogg Foundation. And on a personal note, it's been a delight for me to begin to know you and your team, and we have grown stronger because of the insights you've shared. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michelle.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Michelle Rebels, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I was going to tell you a little bit about community science, but there's no need to do that now. We can just jump right on into the presentation, especially since I know we have limited time. I want to give you just a little overview of what we'll talk about today. We'll start with just a little discussion of what the evaluation design was so you can understand the type of data we collected. Some key findings, we have more objectives and needs, but just in the interest of time, I wanted to focus on these 2, which I thought were really pertinent for today. And then just some suggestions and recommendations that came out of what the parents shared with us, and parent facilitators and principals during the evaluation. And if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. I get a little New York sometimes, even though I've been in Atlanta for 25 years. Slow it down. So just in terms of our evaluation design, really our purpose was to assess the impact of the dialogues on parents' beliefs, values, networks, and access to resources across all schools. And we were especially interested in trying to understand how this may have changed over time in the reread since it was in the 2nd year of implementation. We also wanted to begin to assess if there was this whole school effect of Kindred. So in terms of the implementation activities, how did it go beyond just the parents who were involved, but started to affect the school climate, parent engagement in the school community, and the way that the school just operates as a whole. And then we really wanted to hear any suggestions or recommendations that can inform future implementation efforts of Kindred. Okay. So our data collection activities include an in-depth document review of documents that Laura and her team shared with us. and well as the in-depth interviews with the principals of Reread, as well as 4 parent facilitators. And those parent facilitators are all located at Reread since it was the only school in the second year of implementation and who used parent facilitators. And then we did 5 focus groups across 4 schools. So each of those, Ammon and Bauer, we had 1, E.L. Haynes 1, Reread 2, and I'm sorry, that should have been a Y. Excuse that typo. There was 1 there. So I'll launch right into our key findings if there's no questions about the design. Yes.
I was just wondering how you established the baseline for the point in time now. So did you have a baseline from the year before?
So yes, so I should have not even included survey. So yes, we had in the first year of implementation, Kindred, the pilot program, pilot evaluation, developed a survey for that. And so we used that same survey and tweaked it a little bit, just so that it could fit what we needed to talk about for the second year, the kind of data that we collected. So we do have the pilot evaluation survey results as well as the year 2 survey results. Thank you, Basson. So key findings. Across all 4 schools, parents really reported that the most valuable parts of the parent dialogues were having a safe and judge-free zone, a place where they could talk and share, learn about one another, understand their commonalities as well as their differences, and really grapple with the difficult conversations that often occur around race and equity. And do that so that they can be vulnerable, as Laura mentioned earlier. And they also wanted that space that allowed them to be able to connect with other parents. Come meet other parents, learn more about what was going on in their school community, so they can interact more regularly on a more regular basis. By having those conversations, those facilitated conversations, because it was always a facilitator there involved, they were able to open up and share enough so that they could actually build those trusting relationships and be vulnerable with one another, share past experiences, share concerns that they were currently having about the school, and know that they could bounce ideas and thoughts off of each other and share that without there being any judgment or reproach. And this led to having those really rich and honest discussions about race, diversity, and equity within that space. And for many, this wasn't a space they could find elsewhere. They were able to do this at Kindred. They weren't sometimes able to do this in their own personal lives or with their own friendship networks, but they were able to use Kindred as a network to be able to have those conversations. And by doing that sharing, this led to a real deepening of empathy, right? So people began to better understand not only themselves, but also others, and others' struggles, others' concerns, others' needs, others' perspectives, how maybe their children was getting their needs met, but maybe this other set of group of children were not getting their needs met. And be able to understand how people are more similar than dissimilar, but even you need to still understand those places where you're dissimilar so that you know how to reach across those and create those bridges. Okay. Across all 4 schools, the parents also shared that being in a dialogue and being in the parent dialogues allowed them to share a variety of resources. Very similar to the slide that Laura just shared. People were able to talk about and share information about how to get into magnet middle school and high school programs, summer camps, where to go for vaccinations, all different kinds of resources that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to if they were not in these parent dialogues. For some, it was even deeper than that. They were struggling with their own personal problems or health problems, which they were able to share that with the group, and the group was then able to come and give them some advice or guidance about where to seek help. So it became an invaluable resource for that. Then parents also reported these sort of internal shifts within themselves in terms of being able to have an increased understanding and awareness of racial issues at their schools. Sometimes parents of the children were not really directly affected. So they did not necessarily know what was happening with kids other than their own children. And they didn't know what was happening with groups other than their own children. But coming to these parent dialogues, talking with one another, sharing that information, they became far more aware that, oh, there's this group over here that may not be getting the same equitable treatment as this group over here. It also led to some internal shifts where people started understanding and thinking about their own biases and how they interact. and the actions that they take and how they choose to have conversations and who do they talk to, who do they approach, who do they interact with. Those sort of internal shifts in understanding led almost all parents that we spoke to in our focus groups, as well as those who completed the surveys, to really make very concerted efforts at behavior change, which include reaching out, talking to other parents, doing coffee shops, having increased interactions, and really making an effort to talk to parents from different racial and ethnic groups. Parents also became better advocates for their own children, but also saw that their advocacy responsibility extended to other children as well. This was particularly seen among the parent facilitators who were in their second year of the program, had gone through the first year, and were playing that role. And they really focused more on being able to advocate for other children for equitable resources.
Yes. Those universal internal shifts, how did they differ among parents of different races?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So methodologically, we did not segment our focus groups by parents of different races, so I can't say, well, African American parents thought this and Hispanic Latino parents thought this. But within the groups, as people talked about it, the shifts were different, right? So sometimes it became more that I feel more comfortable now being able to speak up, or I now know that I have an ally who will support me in my efforts. And then for some of the white parents, or even some parents who call themselves parents of color with privilege, who were necessarily, their children necessarily didn't have the same disadvantages, began to understand that they too also had a role, and how could they best use their privilege to make sure other children with disadvantages were getting more equitable access. So the shifts happened in a lot of different ways. And some parents talked about being able to now talk more openly and explicitly with their children about race issues. And that happened across the board. So, yeah, different groups experienced it differently, but the shifts happened. In terms of the whole school effect, one of the ways that we really looked at this was what kinds of changes did we see in engagement in the school system, or in the school community. And there was, across all groups, people talked about becoming more involved with the PTA. And that could either be deciding to become a part of the PTA leadership, becoming a more active member of the PTA, or even starting a PTA. So that their voices and their concerns could be heard, and they could bring some of the issues that they were raising in the Kindred Dialogue groups to the PTA, so that it's at a wider, broader audience, and there would be more action taken. More involvement in simple things like school field trips, having more English and Spanish speaking room parents, which is critical. One of the schools developed an affinity groups, so it became a place where Black parents or Hispanic Latino parents could come together and talk about concerns that they may be having in the school, and it was another safe space. This parent intramural group, one of the schools decided to have a parent-led orientation so that new parents coming in could immediately start connecting with parents who were there, building those relationships from the start, and being able to say, oh, okay, this is a welcoming environment. I'm already meeting parents. I already see faces that I know. Parents also became much more active in terms of providing input and feedback to school leadership. And in some schools, Marie Reed in particular, principals sought out that feedback and created avenues for that feedback to be given. I think it was impressive that some parents whose voices may not have always been heard as much, particularly Hispanic Latino parents, started becoming more involved. Their voices were heard, feedback was sought out from them, and they had more of a say in how things were happening. And also at Marie Reed, they employed a parent coordinator, right? So that you have this position where we really try and increase the relationship and increase the coordination between parents and school, and have a formal avenue for giving that feedback, as well as increasing the connection among parents. Any questions on that before we move to suggestions? So for the suggestions and recommendations, I have to say, let me put this in the context of, in general, almost all parents were extremely pleased about their experiences in Kindred. Folks praised it highly. I know I don't have the quotes in here today, but if you have time and you can read the evaluation report, there's some really pretty powerful quotes in there from parents who really talked about the difference that Kindred and being in Kindred made in their lives. So most of these are recommendations that were just sort of ways to improve or ways that could potentially be helpful. Not that people had any major concerns. They've all saw Kindred as a very valuable experience. But I think one of the key points here is that we need to make sure as we move forward, particularly as you move out to using more parent facilitators and the parents taking more ownership, that all those facilitators are really trained in the basic facilitation skills and are really well equipped. Because those dialogues, those conversations are not easy. They're not easy to have, they're not easy to facilitate, they're not easy to manage. So you need to make sure that they're skilled and able to do that. And continue the flexibility and willingness to figure out what's the right mix of meeting times. Because that may look different across the schools. Some groups may need to meet every week, some every other 2 weeks. What's going to work best in that situation and make it work for that particular group in that particular school. As part of the Kindred dialogues, you have the trust building phase and you have the action planning phase. It's going to be really important as you continue to move forward to really build adequate time in for that action planning phase so that all of that trust and all of that momentum and all of that energy can be successfully translated into concerted action that's taken beyond the dialogues and continue to move and continue to affect change at the larger school level. And so here's the tension, right? You want more time for the action planning, but nobody wants to give up that time in the beginning to do the trust building relationships because it was so important and so invaluable, and it was an opportunity that most people never had before. So that has to stay, but we need more time for action planning. So that's a little conundrum we'll have to figure out, but it has to stay. And continue outreach efforts to engage a diverse set of parents. So having Kindred leadership and others in the school reach out. So as parents are coming in and they're new and you see parents, make sure you're reaching out to them and say, oh, have you heard about Kindred? Have you heard about this? Have you heard about the PT? So that parents are not necessarily having to go seek it all themselves, but they're being told about it, they're being invited in, and that also helps create that welcoming environment. So just in summary, I would say that Kindred is on the right path, on track. It's promising all those great words to achieve the outcome that is really laid out for itself in its logic model. And those are just 4 of the examples of the outcomes. I can stop here in the interest of time. I don't have time for questions. I'm sorry, I don't.
You go ahead, you want to just one real quick one. We talked about parents. Could you characterize, you said you had conversations with the 4 principals?
No, I'm sorry, with one principal.
One principal.
With one principal.
Okay.
And I've kind of weaved that into the findings here, just in the interest of time. But I would say that the conversation that we had, the principal finds Kindred to be an invaluable resource, much needed within the school setting, and one that has contributed tremendously to improving parent connection in the school environment.
But I'm here, I'll be speaking.
I'm trying to do my little anonymity here. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for providing us with that overview. In your folders, there is an overview of the survey, and it was just posted online at 8:30 this morning on our website if you want to see the whole thing. So I am incredibly honored now to introduce Victor Reynoso. When I first moved to DC in 2003, I responded to a Craigslist ad, not from Victor, but from Victor's brother, Ricardo, trying to find a roommate. And Ricardo did choose me to live with him. However, we developed a very close friendship. And I'd always kind of heard about his very famous brother in the education circles that we traveled, but at the time I was actually working in international development, and our paths didn't cross that frequently. Until I decided to run for the State Board of Education in Ward 1, Victor and I began to really get to know one another better. He was my treasurer for that campaign, has been an endless source of advice and very wise counsel for me. I'm incredibly indebted to him. When I think of Victor, as I'm sure is true for many of you who know him, the words brilliant strategist, political genius, savvy, entrepreneur, and changemaker likely come to mind. And what is remarkable about Victor, in addition to all of that, is how humble, generous, and deeply committed to his family he is. I feel incredibly fortunate to have gotten to know you, Victor. And when he agreed to serve as my campaign treasurer 4 years ago and now on the board of Kindred, I think I did a little dance each time. Victor is my mentor and friend. I don't know where I would be if I hadn't answered his brother's Craigslist ad, but surely it wouldn't be here talking with you. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Victor Ramos.
Thank you, Laura, for that personal, very personal introduction. And I just, what I love about working with Laura and appreciate is just, as she started out, the vulnerability that she has always shown and the really strong commitment to learning. In starting this organization from the get-go with Kindred, she baked in an evaluation, an independent evaluation, and we all like to look good, feel good about ourselves, and it's very rare to find somebody who's going to take a risk and is going to, from the get-go, have somebody like watch over her shoulder and tell her what's working, but more importantly, what's not working, and to have a willingness to share that on a real-time basis, I think says a lot about the vision behind Kindred. I wanted to say a little bit about more about how I got here. I got engaged in education in DC about 12 years ago when I naively went to volunteer for a Board of Education campaign, and then through an unexpected turn of events found myself a candidate for another campaign. But at its core, what was driving me was just this notion of parent engagement. I lived within walking distance of 2 DC public schools that I was unsure about would from my perspective, be adequate for my children. And my neighbors and friends resolved that by leaving the city and moving to neighborhoods that they felt provided the education they wanted for their children. And again, naively, I thought, this can stop, it has to stop, and it's really up to parents to stop this and make it better. And so that's an extreme form of parent engagement, which I wouldn't recommend for everybody, but I supported Laura when she decided that was the right path for her. And over these 12 years, the schools have undergone a tremendous amount of change, and not all that change has been smooth. There are some rough edges to that we continue to need to work on as a community. But when I first started almost 30 years ago as a volunteer at a DC public school, we were in a very different state than we are today. That first year that I volunteered, school didn't start on time because the fire marshal said that the schools weren't safe and forced a delay in the first day of school. There's books didn't come on time, so teachers weren't hired on time, principals weren't hired, teachers that were hired didn't get paid. There were a tremendous number of things that happened, and that all feels like a distant memory, but I think it's important to remember how far we have come, but also how much further we have to go as a city. And I'm thrilled, having been part of that kind of big infrastructure change, that we're now at a place where people are investing in the infrastructure of parents, which is absolutely critical for this work. And in the case of Marie Reed, it's just a nice thing that came together, that investment in the parents through Kindred as the building was being modernized, and just that coming together of new energy and new potential, I think is a great story in the case of Marie Reed. So my kids are DC public school students. In fact, I don't know which direction it is, but my daughter is at Adams across the way there, okay? And I think it's important to, in terms of table setting, to recognize that we're in a neighborhood, Adams Morgan, that is named for its segregated schools. Adams was the all-white school, and Morgan was the black school. And that legacy and the impact of that exists today. It was only not even 60 years ago. It was about 60 years ago that the desegregation of the DC public schools happened. And so this stuff is real. And again, in that we have not wanted to be vulnerable in those conversations, and Kindred creates the space for us to engage in important conversations. One of the great pleasures of the 12 years that I've been involved in education was meeting John King, who he and I met about 10 years ago when he was not quite so famous. He didn't have a detail then. He doesn't have one now either. So there's no greater champion for open and honest conversations about segregation in our schools, and for the importance of taking this on and truly integrating our schools and creating opportunity across race and class in our education system. And I'm thrilled that he's now part of our local community. And so while he was a great champion nationally, now that he's close to home, living in Silver Spring, being able to use that voice to help encourage us to invest in this is a tremendous opportunity. And so it's a great pleasure to introduce my friend and our former Secretary of Education, John King. I'd like to invite the parent panel, as well as our principal, Katie, Kessia, Mike, and Shaw.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you, Victor, for the introduction. Thank you, Laura and Tracy, for the opportunity to join all of you. It is always great to be with the DC schools community, and I'm so excited about the conversation we're about to have. So, where I'd love to start is to ask each of our parents to talk a little bit about why Kindred, but first tell us about your kids. So, Mike, why don't you start, and we'll come this way.
Okay. Thank you for that question, and thank you, Laura, for the opportunity. And I'm just so excited. Let me just say that. I'm just so excited about the fact that so many people are in this room interested in this work. My name is Mike Dixon, and my children, as you asked about, are named Micah and Magnus. They're 10 and 7, respectively, and they're a handful, to say the least. My children attend Washington Union Public Charter School, and it's definitely been a very interesting experience, a rewarding experience, a challenging experience. And you asked why Kindred, right? I can say, honestly, I did not choose Kindred. I didn't know what Kindred was. All I know is my wife told me that she gave my information to some people at school, and that I should probably check it out. So what happened from that conversation is I got a lot of text messages, a lot of emails from Kindred, and maybe even a phone call or two saying that they would like me to come participate. And I wasn't very sure. As parents, we all have so much going on in our lives, like adding something new is like taboo almost. So after so many engagements, texts and calls and emails, I figured I better just at least go and see what it was about. So I went to see what it was about, and I never looked back. From the first moment, from the first meet, not even the first meeting, the first moment when I walked into the room, people were, I don't know about all the parents yet, we were still forming the trust and so forth, but the people who were facilitating were so warm and hospitable and approachable. They created a warm space a happy space, you know. So it was easy for me to begin to just connect with people. Matter of fact, you know, they started it and we all just kept it going. So I was excited about coming to the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth meeting, and I'm sure that'll come out as we discuss further.
Great, thanks, Mike.
No
Shaw?
problem.
Hi, I'm Shaw Vance. My kids are Elizabeth and Judith are in kindergarten and pre-K 3 at E.L. Haynes in Petworth Charter School. So we sent our kids to E.L. Haynes for two main reasons. One was it's a really diverse environment of kids, and that was very important to us, but more at a theoretical level, not necessarily, we didn't really know what that meant. And then the second reason was because the vision, I think, of E.L. Haynes is really to be a great school for all kids, not just for a certain kind of kid or from a certain kind of background. So when I heard about Kindred at Back to School Night last year, I didn't really know what the model was, but you know, race, equity, it seemed to kind of put it all together, put all these things together that we were interested in and loved about Haynes. So it's definitely was big and is a big time commitment, but it seemed, especially right now with some of the stuff that Tracy was talking about with kind of the country and everything the way it is, it seemed like it was this seemed like a step in that direction, and it seemed like would be well worth the effort to just go see what it was about and really put forth some effort on this topic for a year and see what happened.
Great, thank you. Cassia?
Hey everyone, I'm Cassia Cruz. I'm a Marie Reed parent. I have a wonderful 8-year-old girl in 2nd grade. Why Kindred? So that seems like a long time ago now for me. I started, it was fall 2 years ago. Marie Reed was under construction. We were off-site over at McFarland. And Laura approached me. Someone had mentioned it, and she said, you know, would you be interested? I said, oh, we're closing the academic gap. Okay, yeah, that sounds important. I'll show up, you know. And as we went through our sessions, our first session, I walked into the room and I kind of knew by name most of the parents, but I didn't really know them. You know, I hadn't really interacted and gotten to hear their experiences, know where they came from. I just knew them as mostly moms who showed up at the playground or, you know, who were at drop-off, and we were friendly. By our second session, we had kind of gone pretty deep, and it was fast. It was deep and it was fast. We had a great mix of parents in the room. We had monolingual Spanish, monolingual English, bilingual. It was a good mix. And when I say we went deep, we had to share our experience about our personal education and then the education of our parents. And so to get there, I kind of stayed high level, right? Like most people who know Reed know my mom, and I was like, oh well, you know Miss Montoya, she's wonderful, and you know her educational background, she's a rock star. She's always been good when it comes to grades, and you know she's come to the United States. She's been working on her degree for like 20 years. She's a power driver, right? And as for my education, Holton alum, and so it was just kind of like I've been blessed. I have my privilege, and I'm good. And the person, we kind of went around the table, and this is kind of what made me come, right? Like it was my drive to continue with Kindred. I had a parent sitting next to me that I had to translate for, and she shared that she had gone to school up to 6th grade, and then she had to stop going to school because she had to go work on a farm to take care of her family. And that hit me so hard. My father was in the exact same situation. And I was understanding of her experience because that was my father. And her child was me. And so connecting on that level and realizing that I hadn't shared my father's experience because of shame or whatever, or I still don't know why, but it was something that connected so deeply that I said I had to come back. And I think I missed one session because I couldn't get out of work. But there was no way that I was going to miss having that experience with her. And I've never, like, I haven't told her that, right? Because she's not a Marie Reed parent anymore. She's gone off to other schools. But having that connection that she probably had no clue about made me that much more aware about where I was coming from, what we were doing, and why this was so important. So, yeah, that's why Kindred.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Let me ask you, Katie, you accepted the pilot of Kindred at your school. Tell us about that decision.
Well, good morning, and good morning. Welcome to Marie Reed, everyone. I'm Katie Lundgren. I'm the principal here at Marie Reed. This is my 5th year as principal, and if you know anything about Marie Reed or this community, you know that the school in particular has gone through a dramatic change in the last 5 years since I've become principal, including the renovation of this beautiful building. And so when I first arrived here in 2014 as principal, I started to learn a little bit about the history of Marie Reed. And so I'm glad that Victor mentioned the Adams and the Morgan schools. This is the current, like the present iteration of the Morgan School. And if you want to learn more about that history, please take a look at our Legacy Walk before you leave today. It's right next to the Welcome Center, the security desk, and it tells the whole story of a segregated community here becoming desegregated, the Adams and the Morgan schools, the birth of Marie Reed as a school and as a place where there was a vision, as early as the 1960s for an integrated school community and for students, no matter what their background, to come to this school and to get an excellent education. And when I became principal in 2014, it was and continues to be a majority minority school where there's a tremendous sense of family and community and pride, but students weren't necessarily performing at their highest potential. And so that's been my mission since day one. And one of the things that I kind of saw coming down the pipeline with the Adams Morgan community and gentrification and the new allure of this building, honestly, for families of a certain economic level and education level, was I sort of foresaw, I guess, a identity crisis, so to speak, for our school and our community. And it was extremely important to me that the students and families that built this school and that made it such a beautiful place to be continue to be valued, continue to have power in the school, even while more highly educated, more affluent, more white families began choosing Marie Reed. And so, that was in my little brain. I'm not a super extroverted person to go out and get all these partnerships and have all these conversations. And so, I talk about that with my leadership team, but it wasn't a natural conversation I could have with the parent community. It's kind of awkward, and I'm a white woman, and I'm not from DC, and so there's a lot of barriers to having that conversation in a really honest way. And so I'd say it's serendipity, really, with Laura being the Ward 1 State Board of Education official. She and I met that way, and again, over coffee. We sat down. I guess, Tracy, you talked about a coffee meeting?
Yeah.
We sat down, and she mentioned, so beware, if Laura invites you to coffee, something's about to happen. But so Laura and I sat down and talked. She knew about my vision for the school. She shared this idea for Kindred, and I said, sure, let's do it. Because I had no idea how to have this conversation within my school community. And I'm so glad that we took this risk because, like Kessia said, we have forged so many relationships that would not have been forged. There have been so many critical conversations about equity among families and among our PTA leadership, among my staff and our leadership team, among our students that have allowed us to really name our values as a school community and insist that we not compromise on those values, even when, highly educated, highly affluent, highly sort of influential parents, decide to join the Marie Reed community. They are joining a community. They are not starting a community here.
Thank you. So Katie talks about the sort of importance of communication and cooperation across lines of difference of race and class. I'd be curious for each of you as parents, what you took away from the Kindred experience about this idea of diversity. What you learned about diversity as part of the Kindred experience. Maybe Sean will start.
Sure. So I think I think I'll go back to something that Kessia was talking about at the beginning. One thing that it was during one of our initial conversations when we were talking. Actually, sorry, it wasn't. It was a couple sessions in when there was the session where we talked about our hopes and fears for our kids and their education. It's also the session where we kind of bridge. I can't remember which came first, but we also talked about the achievement gap at Haynes, and Haynes has a big achievement gap. Despite the fact that leadership and teachers and everyone at the school really is committed to not having achievement gap, and I really know they're kind of doing everything they can to address that. One thing that we all shared our hopes and fears for our children at school. One thing that some other parents shared that it just is not really a fear for me is some people talked about how they were scared that their kid wasn't going to graduate from high school, or how they're going to just not do well academically, not go to college. And for me, that's just not even on my radar screen, and that's just a given for me. So something that really hit me as we talked about that, and then as we talked about the achievement gap, is what a hard job the school has when they're dealing with kids who are coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, parents of all sorts of different backgrounds, all these parents who have different expectations for their kids and for their school. And what a tough job it is for the school to deal with that. And I know that I think they're doing kind of everything they can think of to deal with that. So something that really hit me is that as parents, we are kind of, I think we're kind of at Haynes in particular maybe, but at Haynes, we're kind of an untapped resource where parents want to do something, but they don't know what to do. And it's all these different parents who are really, I think we'll talk about, but really are not really talking to each other, just kind of doing their own thing. So I think for me, the diversity in the school it's sort of, there's a lot of power there, but it's also a barrier. And so with Kindred, I think it's a really great way to do something about that and to harness that potential.
Kessia?
So, diversity at Reed, kind of what Katie mentioned, we've got a mixed bag right now, right? We've got a little bit of everything, and it's been super exciting to see that we've had this major shift, but at the same time, it's been nerve-wracking, right? For those of us so I'm also a Marie Reed alum. So I've been in this community for 30-something, I'm not going to age myself in years. And so when I was a student here, I remember the incredible culture that we had. I don't know if anyone here knows about Marie Reed 30 years ago, but we had an incredible principal then named Dr. Sparrow, who had such a powerful impact. We talked about civil rights. We had Black history all year long. We sang the Black national anthem and the national anthem at every single assembly. I mean, that's how powerful, that's how in tune he was to what the community needed at that time. Fast forward 30 years. We don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. We don't sing the national anthem. We don't do any of those things anymore. But there still has to be some sort of connection to all of these different cultures that are part of the school. And that didn't really exist until January this year, actually. So we have this election, right? We had these different policy changes, and we were going through our Kindred groups, right? So I was facilitating one group, and then the TPS law kind of came up. And I don't know how familiar people are with that, Temporary Protective Service, or what is it? Status, thank you. So that was a huge issue for a lot of our families here who have been here for decades in some case under TPS, but we're now in fear of what their future was going to be and the future of their children, the future of their homes, their future of their finances, right? Like you're losing everything in the next 18 months. What do you do? So we talked to Katie, who was already like, yes, you're right, we need to do something about this, and she was open to allowing us to start a Latino affinity group. And so we kind of got together, set a date, found a space within the school, and, had everyone come in at I think it was 8:30 in the morning, and we had, coffee and tamales and some sweet bread, pan dulce, and all got together and kind of talked amongst ourselves. It wasn't to talk about their TPS status. It was to say, we're here, we hear you, you're safe, and let us know what we can do to support you. And it was so amazing because, like I said, TPS didn't come up, but parents finally felt like they could say what they felt was important, right? Like this is what I'm worried about. And one of the items that came up was food insecurity, right? And it was interesting because you had other parents who kind of were just like, hunger isn't real in the district. Mm-hmm. Well, this group feels differently. Mm-hmm. And the administration was present so that, they heard the message loud and clear. But the fact that parents could finally feel safe in a school that they come to every single day, that their children spend all day in, was just so critical and completely shifted the voices that were being heard. So, we're still working on other groups to kind of identify who needs the most support and how we form that and how it marches forward, so that we're not, it's not just a matter of race, it's a matter of we have single women who are moms, we have single men who are dads, and supporting the people who feel like they're marginalized within our school. So.
Mike?
So I just kind of got wrapped up in Cassia's response. And I know we're talking about diversity, but I want to make sure I get the context of the question. Could you possibly ask it again?
Yeah, so Katie started us on this idea that the Marie Reed community brings together people who are different because of race or language or immigration status or economic status. So what have you learned from your experience at Yu Ying and the Kindred experience about diversity and communicating across those lines of difference?
Okay, thank you. My wife and I chose Yu Ying for diversity. We chose the school because it teaches not just Mandarin to the children, but it gives the children an opportunity to experience Chinese culture through the learning process, not in addition to the learning process, but they learn through Chinese culture and through Mandarin. So we chose that school for that particular reason. And as I think about your question, the more I think about your question, I realize I grew up in the same neighborhood where my children are going to school, not too far from where my children are going to school. And I myself went to Brightwood Elementary School. And at the time I went to elementary school, there were no white students at our school. I don't remember a white student at all from kindergarten all the way to 6th grade. I remember 2 Latino families. Yeah. So we didn't really have to deal with diversity from a cultural aspect, maybe from a socioeconomic aspect, but not from a cultural aspect. And as I look at my children as they matriculate through their elementary process, through their primary schooling, I can name 6 different cultures that they go to school with right off the top of my head, and I'm pretty sure I won't hit every culture that's at the school. Not to mention we still have socioeconomic barriers and other barriers that our children are faced with going to school. So I think that sometimes we think of diversity as people being in proximity with each other. So, okay, we got black families, white families, Latino families. We got some families from different countries in Africa. We got some families from different countries in South America. And they're just, they're all in the same place, but that doesn't make it diverse. I think I heard Kessia say, I knew the people by name, the people that, moms that showed up at the playground, but I didn't know them. And, it's the same situation for me. And when I think about being diverse, in order to be diverse, there has to be some intimacy, So what Kindred came along and did just blew up my whole, just destroyed my understanding of what diversity, really meant, because I was like, yeah, we're diverse, right? And, so then I had to sit down with, 9 to 10 other people from diverse backgrounds and have these conversations, these deep dives, these sometimes uncomfortable conversations, where we would talk about things like children being shamed or othered, where we would talk about, the fact that, I remember one meeting clearly where one of the black women in the room said, "I'm just so tired of teaching white people what it's like to be black." And I was sitting there like, what? She said that? but just being able to be, brave in this space because it's a safe space, caused me to feel the same way. And we all talked about, so many different things that we don't really talk about amongst each other. I know, I can't say for everybody, but I know for me, growing up, we had 2 switches. I could be this way with my friends, but I had to put on a different face in, other spaces, right? So, I had to speak articulately in some spaces, but in other spaces, I could speak a different way. So what Kindred is helping us to uncover and to discover is that we don't have to be other ways. We don't have to be one way in one situation and another way in a different situation. And that is that particular behavior that we've all probably been taught. I know, I can't speak for every culture, but I know black people have been taught that, right? That is really, it detracts from building community cross-culturally. So we've got to be our most authentic selves. And I think that's one of the things that, we're discovering through the Kindred process. And that leads to true diversity.
Such a powerful. So I know we have a limited amount of time left, but Katie, I'm curious, and this is such a powerful conversation, but what would you say to the skeptic who says, well, that's great, it's a small number of parents, they're in this conversation, but why does that matter for the school as a whole?
It's a great question. I'm glad that I'll have time to kind of speak to that. Because as you all know, this is year 3 for us with Kindred. We've completed 2 years with Kindred. And as Laura pointed out in the model overview, in the first year, we had 2 groups of parents. It was no more than 20 parents. And our student body, we have over 400 students. So it's, we're a fairly good-sized elementary school, and that's a very small percentage of our families that were initially a part of the conversation. And I know in that first year, there were a lot of skeptics and a lot of question marks, right? Like, we had our PTA leadership over here, and then we had this, renegade group of parents. It felt kind of renegade that were part of Kindred. And there wasn't a lot of information about what they were doing, and they were always in this, room to themselves, having these little circular conversations, and that led to a sense of mistrust among parents, like it's the us and the them. And so the PTA leadership would say, well, are the Kindred parents making decisions about such and such? And then the Kindred parents would say, well, we're not Kindred parents. We're just parents at Marie Reed. We want to do, for our school. So there was initially a lot of mistrust and a lot of, skepticism among families that were not participating. And so in the second year, when the Kindred circles grew, the Kindred team, Sangeeta and Laura and I met to think strategically about how to break down that mistrust. And one of the solutions was to get some of these PTA leaders involved in Kindred themselves, so they could have this experience and sort of understand what was going on. And I think that became like a real, what do you call that? The flywheel thing. So they, they started to realize like, oh, this isn't like a club. This is a process for sort of understanding better what our school community is really about, and how I, as a parent, in my from my particular vantage point, how I can contribute to making the school better and to addressing the achievement gap. So last year, in our second year, I think that was a real tumultuous year in terms of identity. And that's where I started to hear from parents, of all different shapes and sizes, like all different sort of feedback. And it would come through the action planning process, and then it would come through other more, natural ways as well, to the point where it felt like a little bit like a fire hose of feedback. And I'm like, oh, we're so good. We're doing Kindred. We got parents talking to each other. We're like, our students are improving. Our teachers are amazing. We're doing great. And then I get all this feedback. And I'm like, no, we're not doing great. We are like doing well, and we've got to do better. And that fire hose really prompted me to budget for a parent coordinator so that I could have more resources for garnering this feedback and bringing parent voices to the table. And so that has been really critical. And I think to get to the initial question again about skepticism, once we started to really open up the doors of understanding across all these different groups, it became not just me talking about diversity. It became not just me talking about equity. It was no longer just my teachers or my leadership team talking about it. I now had parent allies from different walks of life that were talking about that same value that we as Marie Read, as a Marie Read community, hold to be very important. And that has been critical because, again, as a white woman, I can only have, the way that I show up to conversations is this way. And so when there are different conflicts that come up in our community, whether it's among parents or staff or whatever, I now have a diverse set of parents who are on the same wavelength that I can go to and say like, hey, I need your help in addressing this issue, or I need your help in bringing this up in a way with these other parents that can be heard. And so it has unleashed a set of voices that has been really critical to my vision here, and it's messy. It's definitely unearthed some things that I wasn't expecting, but it's good. We're working through a lot of stuff. So hopefully that gets to the question a little bit.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes for audience questions. Yes, sir.
So I'm actually itching to ask this question, and it's a good segue from your comments.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the vocal critics saying about
The vocal critics of our school, or vocal critics of Kindred?
Yeah.
I can't say that anyone is so bold as to be a vocal critic of Kindred, because they know that I like it, right? But you can sort of hear a message behind the message. So I would say what I do have are some families that don't quite get it, and they're very challenging. It's a small number, but they're very challenging because they don't quite get it, and the comment I made earlier about like this is a school community that you are joining. It's not a school community that you're starting. That's kind of the rub that I have with some folks that don't quite get it, and they think that and they come with very good intentions, right? Like they want to make the school better, and they want to contribute in different ways, and so they're very, very persistent in what they want to do without hearing what the rest of the community really wants. And what I'm hoping will happen, what I think I see happening, is that voice that doesn't fit is not as loud anymore. You know, they start to see, you know, their peers don't really agree with them, or their peers aren't really stepping up to say the same thing as they are, because they see that the school leadership, the parent leadership, the teacher leadership is moving kind of in a different direction. And I struggle with that because we are a public school. We are a neighborhood school. Anyone who lives in our boundary from K to 5 is welcome to attend. And so it can be tricky because, you know, I want everyone in our boundary to feel welcome and to feel like they can be a part of our school community. And at the same time, I have to really protect the vision that every student, every family here is valued, and that we're going to continue to work towards that aim. So, does that help?
Piggyback on that just
Yeah.
for a second.
Sure.
So part of that shift has also been in how we use our resources. That means parents, that means money, that means time. So our PTA went from being a PTA to a PTO, right? Simply because of the structure that it was. We became an organization so that we could create a parent engagement committee, right? And that parent engagement committee works directly with the parent coordinator. And that committee is composed of, well, I'm one of the chairs, and another kindred participant who we're really pushing to have, you know, room parents that are, that can communicate to both Spanish-speaking and English-speaking parents. It's just so much more impactful in how we're doing our events. So for example, last Friday, normally we'd have a movie night, right? Where all the parents would kind of sit in the dark and we'd watch our kids play and watch the movie, and there would be no interaction. Well, we changed it. We had a dance party. And that way, I mean, we added a Hispanic Heritage Month theme to it, so that way we would have, you know, pupusas, and we would have pan dulce, and have like something different where parents felt like they were welcome. We had it in the evening. We had all sorts of different kinds of music, and it really gave parents an opportunity to talk amongst themselves and build that bridge. We completely changed our priority. We changed our vision. Actually, our PTO board had a retreat with Laura so that we could discuss race and equity and diversity and what our priorities were really going to be, and whether we were really meeting the needs of every single member in our community. And that is a completely different shift from the past 4 years that I've been a parent here at Reed, where before I'd literally walk into a room full of white parents, maybe one other minority if I was lucky, and I'd have to sit there in a white space to try to remember that I have a voice, right? And I'm not saying I represent all Latinos or all minorities or all parents of different backgrounds, but at least I'm one. And it makes a difference when you're a part of those conversations. And I personally am just grateful to have other parents who are of diverse backgrounds in the room now, who are saying, you know what, that's probably not what's best for the use of our resources for our entire community, because there's people who have different needs. Let's talk about that. Instead of saying, my child needs yoga, all 4-year-olds need, you know, activity, and so we're going to pay for that, right? Like, it's so different from, well, we need uniforms for our kids, so maybe we should have a uniform exchange, right? Like, just completely different thoughts about what we're doing and how we're doing it and who it's impacting.
We have time for one more. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I find that one of the challenges inherent in having these conversations is that you can have people of color, as you mentioned, sir, who are, of course, the educators, or people who are dealing with economic challenges, or educating those with more economic privilege or racial privilege. And then those white families or advantaged families along economic lines can fall into the white savior, rich savior trap. Of course, these dynamics don't do much to undermine the power structures that are the problem in our racial hierarchy in the system. So I'm curious, I don't know who exactly to direct the question to, but how, if at all, you're addressing this dynamic as you have these really important conversations?
Good question.
I mean, I can jump in because I definitely feel that. I mean, as the the white parent up here, and I felt that. I am often uncomfortable with that very dynamic. And I think for me, like I joined Kindred not because not out of like altruism, not out of like wanting to make the school better for other children, but I mean it was also to make the school better for my children. And so that was really in my mind as I was part of Kindred. You know, I wanted to make it, you know, this idea of diversity is really important. So what can I do to contribute to that? I mean, the other thing about, you know, in my group at least, I shared things about myself that I don't like to share about myself, you know, about my background. I mean, I don't like, I mean, I have come from, you know, privileged background. I don't like to advertise that to people, but I forced myself to, and I feel like other people, like I was learning from them and they were learning from me too. I think, you know, I feel like sometimes you're like, oh, you know me, I'm the white lady. You know me, right? But like, but people didn't know me either. It was a sharing, and I so the parent that I made the biggest connection with is a dad who, you know, had like basically elementary school education, that was it, and came here, you know, without documentation, and is here working, you know, the jobs that, low-paying jobs, which are the only jobs that, you know, he's able to get. He lost his job in the middle of the school year, had to move to Iowa because that was the only place where he could get a job. His daughter is best friends with my daughter. Just thinking about how that impacted her, I mean, really made an impact on me. I see his daughter all the time. We had, I mean, kind of, we were forced, I wouldn't say forced, we were forced to have a play date. Like on the weekend, that was a Kindred assignment. And so we did that. Whenever I see his daughter now, she, do you remember the time when we went to the playground? So I mean, I think for, that is a concern, but it just didn't really play out that way.
Can I? Great question.
Yeah.
I mean, just wow, and a great response, right? You know, I just think that a lot of times programs that want to make this kind of shift fall into that trap. But I think what's different about Kindred is there's an idea mining happening, so that the ideas don't come from one segment of the community. The space that's created is a safe space, so people can feel brave enough to say the things that they wouldn't typically say, as Shaw was just commenting. And the resources, there's also a resource mining. So everything doesn't, all of the answers don't come from one place. Right. Typically, in these kind of instances, you're right, the answers tend to come from one place. And that's when you find yourself in this whole salvation, you know, this white salvation type of process. One of the things that I want to say is, you know, to be clear, as a black person, some of the things that we face as black people, right, we know won't change until white people get fed up with it. Right, we're not looking for salvation. I'm not speaking for all black people. I'm just, you know, I know a few black people, and I'm speaking for me and those few black people, right? But we know that police who are assaulting and killing, and we know that all police aren't, you know, evil, but the ones that are doing this won't be held accountable. We are already fed up. Right. We're sick and tired of it. All of us are sick and tired of that, right? And it's just one, just a, you know, example, right? We're all sick and tired of that, but it's not going to change until the sickness spreads beyond our culture, right? You know, the education gap, we're sick and tired of that, but it's not going to change until it spreads beyond our culture. You know, there's a reason why they use the word minority when they talk about black and Latino, and then there are other cultures as well that are minorities. But there's a reason they use that term is because it's fewer of us, right? So in order for the changes that need to take place, that again, that sickness has to spread beyond our culture. Yeah, so I'd say make me blush.
Please join me in thanking Secretary of Education. is now my privilege to introduce Katie Padgett, who's representing JBG Smith today, and who's so graciously sponsored this event. We are personally excited about our alignment with JBG Smith. They just launched a multi-million-dollar affordable and working-class housing Washington Investment Fund. And there's so much promise in what that can do to sustain the diversity that we're experiencing at Marie Reed and other places across the city. Katie.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Dr. King, our amazing panelists, and all of you for being here today. Like Laura said, I'm from JBG Smith, and I'm on our CARES committee. And CARES is our philanthropic arm for JBG Smith. We focus on affordable housing, health and wellness, environmental responsibility, arts in the community, and of course, education. And it was really amazing to walk in and see everybody wins badges on the front desk, and I saw Jubilee Housing Gentlemen in the crowd today. And those are all organizations that we give to, but we give both resources financially and through our partnerships in Days of Giving, which we do 3 months out of the year. We send all of our employees out to different organizations that we work with to volunteer so that they can see what you guys are doing. And this is absolutely amazing, absolutely phenomenal. And I must say, it's been very humbling, I think, to hear this morning kind of that if only actually walked out. If only we had a space where we could talk about all the inequity that's happening. And I'm excited for what will happen in the future and what our partnership will bring. And like Laura said, our kind of if only at JBG Smith has been, if only there was a way to maintain that workforce housing. As developers, we can often hear kind of that big bad gentrification word, but progress has to happen, but progress doesn't mean that we have to leave people behind in the midst of that. And so just like we've heard a little bit today of people trying to have conversations, we've been trying to have conversations, and it's beautiful for me personally to see the Washington Housing Initiative finally get off the ground, and that we are focused both in the district and then in Maryland and Virginia, in areas where everyone's affected by the housing changes and actually making housing affordable for more people, so that we can see those changes happening. And I must say that the one encouragement that I could say, because I know there's a lot of educators, there's a lot of people that work very, very hard, all day I'm thinking hope. I see a lot of hope, and I'm hearing a lot of hope from the parents, and I just want to give just a big round of applause to Laura, because I'm sure she spent a lot of sleepless nights working. Thank you very much. We are happy to partner with Kindred and excited. I know this is the very beginning, but I can't wait to see where our partnership continues. So thank you.
Please, could we give a big round of applause for everybody who spoke and shared their stories today? I want to thank all of you for choosing to spend this morning thinking about this and engaging in this issue. And as we close today, I want to encourage those of you who are staying for the funders meeting right after this to head there just as soon as I finish speaking. If you go back to the entrance where you came in, a Kindred staff member will direct you where to go. If you can imagine what our school system could look like if parents and educators were having these kinds of conversations, if they didn't have to be one person in one space and another person in another space. This is the part of the difference in opportunity that is so often hidden and not talked about, because it's messy and it's hard to measure and it doesn't have a quick return. But this is what is keeping us apart. This inability to talk about our differences without fear, shame, and guilt. And so if you imagine for a moment what it could look like if all of the schools across our city embraced these kinds of conversations, embraced our privilege, embraced where society has left us at this moment, and decided to change it. That is the vision that Kindred has for not just Washington, D.C., but across this country. And you, here in this room, can help us be part of it. And let me tell you 3 ways that you can. First of all, you know it's coming. We need funding to grow. We are not just doing these dialogue groups here. We're in 6 schools, soon to grow to 8 across the city, with an exciting new partnership with DCPS. In addition to that, we are trying to create an incredible network between schools so that parents are connecting with one another and sustaining that energy and momentum that is really hard to sustain unless you keep getting encouraged by other people to do it. So number one, we would love to talk to you about any funding opportunities. Number two, in the programs in your folders, you'll see that there's social media information. Part of what we are doing is growing the network even beyond our parents. Please follow us, please retweet, please like our Facebook, and so on and so forth. Even if it's not you personally who's in a position to fund, maybe someone in your network is and would be really excited about this, and we believe in real partnerships. And finally, I wanted to share something that I encountered this Sunday. I was actually at an event at another diverse school, Watkins Elementary, where a set of parents was talking about their experiences in diverse settings. And one parent explained her take on this, and this was a Black woman who was a lawyer, who felt like she was bridging two worlds because she had this professional sort of white dominant culture setting where she was expected to act a certain way, and then she had her school setting where she was connecting with a lot of Black families in a way that was a difficult bridge. And she decided to be demonstrably different. And she shared that with us. She said, I have decided to be demonstrably different. When I walk out to the playground, I'm actually going to go up to the person who isn't expecting me to say hello, and I'm going to say hello. And when I am walking out my children to the school, I'm going to be incredibly friendly because this needs to be a space where everyone feels like they can be a part of it. And so I share that final message with you today, to dare to be demonstrably different as you leave this room and engage with those around you, to be part of this change that we can. We can do something. And it is why we are here. Thank you.